It is a great honour and pleasure for me to be here. I have been to Ireland 4 times. I've loved it each time, but I have a legitimate qualification. My family moved from Ireland to England in the year AD 1142. Beat that if you can. Anyway, it is a great joy to be here, and while I remember, thank you everybody, Leah and everyone else, for your wonderful hospitality. I've been here a day and I've really made friends. And it's so nice to be with a group of people who aren't all academics as well. So I'm having a lovely time. Tonight, I'm going to be very global, but I am going to do some Irish work as well. But the idea here is to, and I hate keynotes, they're very difficult. You have to entertain, you have to inform, you have to motivate, and you have not to send people to sleep. So it's a rather difficult dynamic. So tonight is going to be deliberately at first rather global, because, and actually the minister touched on this, there are some real issues here which we need to think about in even communities like Totem. I would like to say what a beautiful town you live in. It really is gorgeous. Archaeology for many people, even now, disregarding the dinosaurs, is of course about buried pharaohs, gold, Tutankhamun, fossil humans, Louis Leakey, and all the well-known subjects that feature in the pages of National Geographic. And most people, when they think of archaeology, very often just think of gold and treasure, even today. Or they think of pith-helmeted professors digging in the shadow of great pyramids. Reality, of course, is something very different. But reality now has all sorts of dimensions, one of which is the Hollywood myths. Indiana Jones, the tomb robber lady, the mummy. I know the guy who translated the ancient Egyptian for the movie called The Mummy, and his translations are profoundly obscene. That's, of course, all nonsense. And really, what archaeology does, and in all seriousness, this is why I call it big history, or bigger than history, is that we are the only scientific discipline that covers the entire spectrum of human existence, from about 3 million years ago right up to today. And the issues we explore are enormously important. And that's the first point I want to make. Because back in the days of Tutankhamun, and even 50 years ago, archaeology was just a village. There were very few of us. I went to Olympia Gorge where they found human origins, Zinjanthropus in 1959. And the last time I was there, by chance, I bumped into Richard Leakey's son's wife. And I happened to mention that I had been at the gorge one day after Leakey found Homo erectus, another later hominin, there. And she looked at me and said, "My God, your history." The point being that archaeology has completely changed since I began in this field far too many years ago. Just look at these figures. Globally, there are tens of thousands of archaeologists. China alone has thousands. I looked at a census and there are at least 16,500 archaeologists in 3 European countries. And there were 9,350 in the United States. And apart from that, there are nearly 3,000 archaeological technicians. We are big business. We are an influential field and dimension on history, which is something we forget. But think about some of the things we talk about. What do we do now? We do very sophisticated, multidisciplinary research. We don't have a Louis Leakey going out all by himself. We go out in teams. Geologists, biologists, zoologists, environmental experts, sometimes only too rarely conservators. The big problem that drives a great deal of academic research is this ghastly, ghastly assumption that publish or perish is the way to advance a career. It is absolutely as dead as a dodo. Why? Because archaeology has changed profoundly, and to my mind, the biggest priorities of the next 100 years are very simply enumerated. There's always going to be archaeological discovery. That's a given. We mustn't worship it, and we certainly should abolish publish or perish, because a lot of the publish is of, to put it mildly, dubious quality. And a lot of the theoretical musing is of dubious quality. And a lot of this work has no resemblance to the realities of doing heritage, conservation, tourism, or any of the real issues that confront many of our archaeologists. I'm amazed I don't see horrified faces. There is hope. And one of the biggest things, as I'll talk about in a moment, is cultural heritage and tourism. This is very, very big and getting very big, and as the Minister pointed out, it has a strong economic dimension. And then one of the big problems, which has been much neglected until recent years, is the whole issue of communicating archaeology to people outside archaeology. One of the fascinating things, I've been in public outreach, as they call it, for a long time. One of the most fascinating things I get to do, which is very challenging, is to give lectures to organizations who couldn't care a damn whether archaeology came or left. And I want to walk out there making them say, hey, there's something here. Let me go and see a site, or let me donate the stuff my father collected to a museum, or whatever. Get them reading. And you know something? It works. Because to me, one of the major priorities for the next 100 years is going to convince, as the Minister said, and you said, Mr. Kelly, in making sure that people realize just how important this is. Because the questions we address are big history. We study big questions about the remote and not so remote past, which makes us very relevant, really relevant, to today with its many problems and pressures. And let us never, ever forget that. For example, one of the fundamental issues is diversity. Why are we similar? Why are we different? How did this come about? What is there to be afraid of about diversity? Ladies and gentlemen, nothing. It is the most priceless thing that humanity has. We have a dimension on human diversity that goes back 3 million years. Is this important? Hell yes. We have the ability now, because archaeology is so fine-grained, it really is absolutely amazing. We went to the garden down the street here, and how they reconstructed that with archaeology. An amazing achievement, using highly fine-grained techniques like column analysis to identify what was grown in the garden. Ladies and gentlemen, we can tell you if a hominid who made stone tools was 2.5 million years ago, we can tell you whether he was left-handed or she was left-handed. And we can do some pretty cool stuff. And one of the most cool things we've done is reconstructions of well-preserved individuals. For example, the obvious one, Ramesses II, who died in his 90s, having fathered God knows how many children. He was a very famous pharaoh, and they know, for example, he had horrible dental ulcers. They have a more complete medical history of him than he did. We know that the Amesbury Archer, thanks to isotopic studies, probably spent much of his early life in Central Europe. People were much more mobile. Or Otzi, nobody quite knows how he died, but we know he got an arrow in his left shoulder. We are learning for the first time that these were people who loved and hated, who made mistakes, who had triumphs. But in the end, like all of us, they died. Ladies and gentlemen, we for years have talked about archaeology. What we have not talked about really properly are the people of the past. Male, female, transsexual, young, old, brave, cowards, sick, healthy. Think about it for a moment. This is the most fascinating thing about archaeology. And the spectrum of studies now being done, many of them rather academic, are a testimony to the fact that we're finally realizing this. Look at some of the topics that have gone hot. Gender, changing gender roles over the past. Indigenous rights and indigenous archaeology. Do archaeologists have the right to study the history of Native Americans or Australian Aborigines? And migration, and this huge advance in DNA now, which is showing, for example, that almost certainly modern humans originated in Central Africa, and is showing that the first Americans came over the Bering Strait probably about 16,000 years ago. These have been debates that have been going on for a long time. So there's a lot there. And of course, this is deeply relevant to today's world, where we have the ecological refugee problem. And then, of course, there is the topic which is really exciting, and what I'm going to talk about quite a bit tonight: community archaeology, working with local stakeholders, which is something I saw at work today, and it was wonderful. And I'm not saying it because I'm in Kilkenny. It really is one of the best I've ever seen. And we got to the technology. Just let me give you an example. Angkor Wat, spectacular monument. Have any of you been there? Oh, I have well traveled. Isn't it incredible? It is enormous. It makes Stonehenge look like a village shrine. It makes the tomb of the sun god Amun in Karnak in Egypt look like a Tamfi church. It's enormous. But all they focused on for years, because the site is covered by thick forest, was the architecture, the layout of the empire. Now, thanks to laser technology from satellites, they've been able to look at the entire landscape under the vegetation. And the result is they have got urban quarters, they've got local centers, and they above all have found an elaborate yet highly vulnerable water scheme, which gave water to tens of thousands of people. All of this without digging a hole. And with all these changes, we've got another one, which is very relevant, because a lot of what academic researchers do is relevant, and that is sustainability. There's been some wonderful work done on traditional agriculture. For example, if you go to Bolivia, and you go up on the Altiplano, near Lake Titicaca, I love that name, they have reconstructed raised potato fields in an environment with water around them where frost regularly kills the crops. And by having water around them and the vapor, the temperature is kept low and the crops survive. Hundreds of villages are now adopting what had been forgotten and was reconstructed by archaeology. They're doing the same thing in the Amazon, on the bottom left. And we've hardly begun to explore what archaeology can do sustainably, because our knowledge of traditional societies basically today goes back to before War II. And if you read some of the early anthropology in the 1930s, and you put aside postmodernism and all the blah, 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 you can really learn something about the dynamics of cattle herding. When it's drought, you disperse your cattle. How do you do this? You do it by using your relatives. Kin are vitally important. In many agricultural societies, the ancestors are the guardians of the land, which means when you try and resettle people, you've got to think about their relationship to the ground. And we'll look at an example in a moment. How did people deal with drought, for example? New generations research Chaco Canyon in the American Southwest. Have any of you been there? go, go, go. It really is spectacular because you've got 9 huge pueblos, of which this is the most famous. It's Pueblo Bonito, and you can see the circular structures in the middle. Those are formerly subterranean kivas or ceremonial centers, and it was surrounded by 3 stories of small rooms. And this was a major center of seasonal, particularly at the solstices or ceremonies. And people came in by the thousand to this place, which is a semi-arid environment and exceptionally vulnerable to drought. If you look at the drought figures, you can see Chaco marked in red and Aztec, which is a monument to the north, in slightly wetter climate. And 5 inches of rain there can make a huge difference. You can see just the fluctuations. And look, about 1120 to 1300. Look at all those droughts. What do you do if you live in a canyon which has the capability to support 2,000 people with good rain? What do you do when the rains fail for 50 years? Answer, you move. But what's very interesting, and people didn't realize, with Chaco, all these people really carefully kept kin ties with distant villages. So when it got dry, they moved to be with those relatives. But if out there it got dry, they came to Chaco. You get this constant movement in the face of drought, which is recorded in oral traditions. And we know all these details from annual growth rings in trees. So you put that together with the oral tradition, and it looks, and we know that they dispersed like they did, that the people of Chaco simply dispersed to their relatives. This is simplifying a complex issue, but it shows you what we can do. And this is fascinating stuff for people. They go to Chaco and they say, why is it empty? We have the answers. Our challenge is to make sure that they understand what happened. And it's not easy. Let me tell you why all this is important with climate. Bangladesh is at the head of the Bay of Bengal. It is basically a huge river delta. The highest altitude south of the capital, Dhaka, is 38 feet. And into this Bay of Bengal, you get battling enormous tropical cyclones. And these cyclones not only bring wind, they bring sea surges. And when you're 38 foot above sea level, you have a problem. And in Bangladesh, people basically live at sea level. They live, and at certain times of the year, they literally live in their boats. Some years ago, I went to a lecture by a retired Major General who is now in charge of security, environmental security. Very articulate, gave a superb lecture without notes, had people glued to their seats. And he said that if present sea level change continues, within 50 years, which is not a long time, they're going to have to move, ready for this figure, between 20 and 50 million people, all of whom have close emotional ties to their land. How do you handle that? Myanmar doesn't want them. India doesn't want them. Environmental refugees, there are no international policies for this. This is one of the great challenges, and one of the things about archaeology, studying sea level change, is that we can study some of the dynamics of this, which I'll talk about on Saturday. And look at the score. These are the population estimates for the capital of Bangladesh. And the figure of 21 million for 2025 is probably conservative. Dhaka has polluted groundwater, water shortages, energy shortages, and a serious problem with poverty. And is completely at the mercy of monsoons. So the stakes with climate change are high. I can see your faces now saying, When's he going to get on to cultural heritage? You are about to get a massive dose of it, ladies and gentlemen. One laughs, but I'm deadly serious, because cultural heritage is probably one of the greatest challenges beyond the destruction of the archaeological record that we've ever faced. And the reasons are very simple. Cruise ships and jumbo jets. I traveled over here on Air New Zealand, which is a very good airline, surrounded by tourists who have London on their bucket list. And it must be Thursday, and now I'm in Rome. And one laughs. But these people go to major cultural sites. And one of the great undiscussed, basically undiscussed crises of archaeology is that of overcrowding. Take a look at the Great Wall of China, top right. Or the pyramids. Or Angkor Wat, where they estimate accurately that they'll get 4.3 million visitors by 2020. The site is grossly underprotected. Stairs are wearing away. People are scribbling on the magnificent bas-reliefs thing. And the Cambodian government has no money. And nobody is controlling the number of people going there. What's going to happen? The site is going to be a shadow of what it is now. One of the greatest crises we face in cultural heritage is the reality that sites like this, or the pyramids, or the Parthenon, are economic drivers. They make money. And it's very, very difficult to balance that with what we do about it archaeologically. Because heritage, cultural heritage, to be blunt, is not a particularly high priority for many people doing archaeology. It should be. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be here, because it is for you. And there were massive ones. The Emperor Shi Hongdi in northern China, if you've seen those his regiment, by his tomb, which they have not excavated, although the government is under pressure to do so, but refuses, thank goodness, you get mind-boggling the size, and they've only excavated part of his soldiers. And you go there, and you go in this huge hangar, and you walk around, and in a corner, you see a group of technicians reconstructing more figures. You see all those figures were bits when they found them. And the Chinese government has a serious problem of crowding, local infrastructure, and preventing damage to the sites. And in China, and you forget this, the middle-class tourist business is enormous. So we all face this issue. And now I'm going to go off on a tangent. And it's relevant, certainly, what you and I have been talking about. And that is, archaeology ultimately tells stories. Come, let me tell you a tale, as we say. And this is one of the great neglected arts of archaeology, because we have the most fabulous stories to tell, even about a collection of potsherds. Many years ago, I got a call from a guy who said, "Help, this is a Monday morning, can you give a lunchtime talk to a group of Coast Guard auxiliary members?" These are elderly gentlemen who play at being the Coast Guard. And I said, "Hello? What do you want me to talk about?" I said, "Anything you like. Just turn up." So I turned up. And in a very rare moment of genius, I remembered a couple of Belgian archaeologists who found a scatter of flaked stone in a sandy clearing in northern Belgium. And I said that, and I could see people glazing over. And then I said, they were around a hearth. And sometime after they'd flaked some of this stuff, two people moved away and sat on a boulder about 30 yards away and started flaking artifacts. And the audience went. And then I went on and said, one of those people making those stones was left-handed. You could have heard a pin drop. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we can do with even the most unspectacular objects. Tell a story. Let me tell you another story. This elephants are in a clearing by the Zambezi River. And when I was an ignorant young man, I went walking alone in the bush by the Zambezi in an area which is frequented by elephants. And I walked into a clearing, beautiful day. And suddenly I heard a gentle swishing. And I realized that in the trees there were elephants. And they were breaking down branches. And in Africa you hear elephant stories, you hear snake stories. And I tiptoed away. Thank God they didn't take any notice of me. Why am I telling you this rather self-indulgent tale? For one reason and one reason alone. Because the silent elephant in our room is telling stories for the public. All right, you've got David Attenborough, you've got all that sort of stuff. You've got Time Team, all the rest. But what are we doing about telling stories in communities? Which is why I was so thrilled to go through the museum this morning. The problem is evoking excitement. Let me give you an example. Am I boring you, by the way? No. This is a famous temple in Attica in Greece, the temple of Neptune or Poseidon at Sunion, which is famous for its sunset. It's also famous for the fact that Lord Byron carved his name on it, the poet. When I first went there many years ago, I was there with my girlfriend and nobody else, and we sat and watched the sunset. Bottom photograph. The last time I went, and we could wander among the columns, the site was fenced. You couldn't see Lord Byron's name. And there were probably about 2,000 people there, all on bus tours. And the great thing was that the sun didn't come out. But that's the point. Because one of the ways we tell stories about cultural heritage is by being excited. Many, many years ago, and more recently too, I went to the amphitheatre at Epidaurus, one of the great classical monuments. Have any of you been there?
Yes.
Ah. Oh, I've got well-travelled people in the audience. I was there on a spring afternoon. There was almost nobody in the stadium. And I sat just about where that picture was taken. And suddenly, a German professor walked in with a dozen tourists. He was clearly leading what was a very high-end tour. And he made them sit in the stalls down at the bottom. And he stood in the middle, no microphone, nothing, and quoted Euripides' play, The Aeon. It really was amazing. And he ended up by reciting the famous line, "Siwdig cyfar cladsis, by nos melpone," and the whole thing echoed around that. And just for a moment, I knew what going to a Greek play was like. God, it was a fabulous experience. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge with cultural tourism is to generate those sort of experiences without abusing the record for people, which places interesting challenges for guides. And my classic example of this is Olympia. The last time I went to Olympia, which has been beautifully conserved, they have trained guides. We came to the stadium. And the guide was cited. Oh, well, that's the starting blocks, and it was built in so-and-so by so-and-so, and every year they had this and four. It was dead, and the audience, you could see them sleeping on their feet. What about something different? Why didn't they say, imagine, shut your eyes, imagine a stadium full of people sitting on the sides of the stadium and the judges in their area in the white. Imagine people jostling, drinking from wineskins, the lowing of sacrificial oxen in the background, people yelling and fighting. And then the race would start, and the dust would rise, and he went on, and just go on and give all this detail. I've even got you watching me. But do you see what I'm getting at? It isn't just dates on what happened and being academic with respect, it's making the past live. And that's what's so striking about your medieval museum here. The whole area, I felt the past live. You go into that garden, you meet the nobleman, you go to the tower. It's beautifully presented. And what's nice is that one of the displays talks about what it was like to be a soldier there, with a brazier. God, I was cold. I haven't seen rain since April. Anyway, but that's the sort of thing I think is important. So when you think about cultural heritage, whatever way you look at it, whether you write, television, radio, always remember that the silent elephant in the room is to make it engaging. But you're always going to assume some people couldn't give a damn about it. But you may convince people that it's worth preserving. And it places a big responsibility on tour guides. I went to Hadrian's Wall, and it was snowing. And I went on a tour, and I was the only person, except for the guide. And this guy was really good, because he talked about what it must have been like to be a sentry in midwinter. And he talked about the weather, and he talked about the dullness of it. And he told me just how important the little settlements were. They weren't just to him walls, they were buildings with people in them who cooked and died, fell ill, and all that. And of course, behind the wall, and he took me there to, was Vindolanda, the famous camp, where they have documents that have people asking for socks or being transferred and tell you about the diversity of the people. That's history, and we write bigger history. But my most thought-provoking one was to go to the Great Wall, and I happened to go to a place 150 miles north of Beijing, where a length of the wall has been restored, and you can see it here, going over the hills. And ladies and gentlemen, there was nobody there, just the guide was there. And we had dinner on the wall with wine. And the guide, who was an American actually, who was worked there for 17 years, spent dinner giving me what it was really like there. And he described how Mongolian invaders would try and climb up the wall, and the defenders would cut their arms off. But it just lived what they had lived on, and what happened. I will never ever forget it. I'll go back, because there was no one there, but he cared. And I've had some tour guides who've been absolutely fabulous. I had one of the Pegasus Bridge in Normandy last May, where the bridge has been reconstructed and you've got the bullet holes in the bridge, and a marvelous English guide who really made it live. And he took us to a place where people lay down and fired, where they got killed, where they took the bridge. Oh, it made it live. It made it worth them having done this. And I think one of the things we have to think about is this worth doing, and how are we going to do it? My final example, before I move on to Ireland, which we're probably ready for, and this is a very moving one. An instance in Haida Gwaii in the British Columbia in Canada, used to be known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, is famous for its totem pole-filled villages. This is a Haida village from the 1860s. And back in the 50s, they removed a lot of these totem poles, which are like a forest. They're mortuary poles. They commemorate the ancestors, genealogies, and so on. And they took them to the Provincial Museum in Victoria. But the Native Americans said, no, they belong here, because what they're doing is waiting to go back into our world, into the environment. So wisely, with the help of the Haida, the government is now leaving them to rot away, because they're returning to the ancestors. Because the other dimension of all this is deep respect for people who have different values. And this is an absolutely gorgeous example of this. And now we come to stakeholders. To me, the most important development in recent years has been, in fact, community archaeology. It is inevitably becoming a bandwagon. That's not the point. The point is that what we're doing for the first time is really taking account of stakeholders. Other archaeologists, Native Americans, Australians, whoever you like, or members of local communities. And I must say, what I've seen of community archaeology in Ireland, it is truly magnificent. And when you look at all this, and stakeholders, of course, include game reserve wardens, tourists, local authorities, archaeologists, anthropologists, people studying oral traditions, and so on. We all have a stake in the past, even if we want to deny it. And community archaeology has become hot. One of the places where it first began, of course, was York, with the York Archaeological Trust. Another one was Jamestown in Virginia, seen on the right, where they've actually excavated some of the original houses and identified their owners. This, of course, these are both major tourist destinations, which alters the dynamic. But what's impressive here is that you are taking archaeology at a local level very seriously. As I understand it, and probably I'm going to get this wrong, a great deal of early Irish archaeology was in fact somewhat provincial. It was concerned with the early medieval period and the Well Gaels, or who we were and who we are not, i.e. the English, and ignored and sometimes destructive non-Irish archaeology. This came to a head, as far as I can tell, with the famous protests over the Viking settlement at Woodkill in Dublin, where 20,000 people gathered and there were sit-ins, and the result was the place was preserved. Suddenly people realized that cultural heritage was important to a lot of people, not just archaeologists or experts on the Norse. So, community archaeology now is becoming more and more prevalent, and I've just got a couple of examples here because it's going to be discussed a lot today. But what is very encouraging is the range of stuff that's being done. This, of course, is Glendalough Monastery, originally started in the 6th century AD, and it is being excavated, and they're working on the layout. Here you are. The University College Dublin has a school which combines with community archaeology and close collaboration with all stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen. You can't say they haven't consulted me once people have made the effort. We do not live in an ivory tower. And one of the most impressive things I've noticed here even today is that the archaeologists I've met here definitely do not live in an ivory tower. The future is encouraging. And discoveries included watermill channels from the 12th and 16th century, and a small jet cross found by the volunteer, bottom right. His name was Cormac McGrain. Good for him. An extensive public outreach. There's going to be a talk about this, I think, tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it, because this is sort of integrated effort, and this will never be forgotten in the community. The challenge, of course, is to keep it sustainable. That is something which we really haven't begun to think through. Another example is the Swords Castle in Dublin, about 1200 to 1324, once home of the Archbishop of Dublin. And this is archaeology done by the Fingal community, and it fills gaps in the conservation plan, looking for buildings, investigating 11th century graveyards. Notice the word cooperation. All these things take time and take very close collaboration. You just can't go big, which people used to do. All Gallows Hill in Dungarvan, 12th century, Waterford County Museum, and local residents. Look at the local residents working away there. There's a reconstruction. Enormously important work, much of it done outside the normal framework, but with the collaboration of professionals. I am very tired in archaeology, I don't know that it's true here, but it's certainly true in the United States, of people thinking academics are the top kings, and they don't talk to the people who are doing the well work in the trenches. A consistent problem in archaeology in the States are complaints from people doing cultural resource management that people getting PhDs are too theoretical. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've bullshitted a long time, I've burbled back and forth. I've covered a lot of different subjects. I hope I made the point to you that the future of archaeology is very challenging. I hope I've also made the point to you that I have hope that things are going to happen which are really exciting. I would also like to add on the Irish line that I am profoundly impressed by what I'm hearing is going on here. Apart from learning about Irish archaeology, which has been a pleasure, really some awfully good things are happening. And I raise my battered, non-existent Indiana Jones hat and say, well done. Keep it up, because, God damn it, ladies and gentlemen, archaeology is really important because it is big history. I think I've said enough. Thank you.